Welcome to Bleacher Report's NFL Daily. I'm Mitch, and I'm here to surprisingly break down landing for Matthew Stafford. I didn't think I would possibly be talking about this right now because we just saw the Los Angeles Rams go toe to toe with the best team in professional football in the snow, on the road. And if it were not for a miraculous effort from Saquon Barkley, who knows how far the Rams would have gone this past season. But apparently, the Rams are open to trading their Super Bowl winning quarterback, future Hall of Famer, number 9, Matthew Stafford. So in this live stream, I'm going to break down which teams need quarterbacks, which teams are the best destinations for Matthew Stafford, and which teams actually make the most sense. And because there's a short list of teams that realistically quarterback like Matthew Stafford, we're just going to break them all down, guys. So if that sounds good, like this video if you're on YouTube. Don't forget to follow me if you're on the BR app, and let me know in the comments what you guys think. I'll definitely be peeking over and seeing what you guys think. So let's get it started, man. First of all, I just want to say, I don't know what the Rams are thinking. I don't know why they want this to happen or if this is even real, but there are enough breadcrumbs, right? There's enough smoke. And when there's smoke, there could be fire. I don't know what McVay is thinking over there in Cabo or wherever he is right now, bro. But I don't think this would be a good move for the Rams. I think they have enough cap space to improve their roster on offense and defense. I think that they were a good team last year. They have a young defense. They have Puka Nacua. They got an O-line that should be healthier this year. I really don't see why they would make this move. But if they do, let's kick it off with the team that's probably most likely. And that is the New York G-Men. The Giants will be the first destination for Matthew Stafford. And they're first on the list. It's not really in order of preference or destination, but they're first on the list because they're the most heavily connected to Stafford. The ingredients for a trade began with Stafford to the Giants specifically. So let's break down why this would happen and why the Giants would want this to happen. First of all, Brian Daboll is a little bit on the hot seat. I don't know if you guys have noticed, but the Giants probably had one of the worst years of football that we've seen. Not only were they an awful football team with awful quarterback play, and the Daniel Jones experience officially came to an end in New York, but they were also on one end, on one front, absolutely embarrassed by Saquon Barkley going to the future Super Bowl champs and putting up 2,000 yards. So Brian Daboll definitely needs something to keep his job, and Stafford would help him do that, help him bring some success to the Giants, help him run a functional offense, because I think the biggest ingredient missing for Daboll within his team has been that quarterback position. No question about it. The O-line's been flawed, but the quarterback could solve a lot of issues, right? Secondly, you've got Joe Shane, who he desperately needs to make something happen. Like, he desperately needs to make a move to erase everybody's thought of what he is, which is the guy that let Saquon walk, right? Like, everybody has seen the same clip over and over and over and over again. And it's ingrained in our minds as football fans. We need something. Joe Shane needs something for the people to change their opinions on him, especially Giants fans, okay? So those two individuals desperately need something to happen to save their careers in New York, okay? That's first of all. Secondly, when you look at the offense and the way it's built, there are pieces around the quarterback that make Stafford in New York intriguing. You've got Malik Neighbors, who I think could eventually become a top 10 receiver in the NFL. He's well on his way. Tyrone Tracy was one of the most surprising running backs out of the draft. Explosive player, great pass catching skill set as well, being a former wide receiver. He looked real promising as a running back. Wan'Dale Robinson at slot receiver. a guy that can run the quick, short, underneath routes, hit the intermediate level. He's a nice complement to Malik Neighbors. Even a Theo Johnson, who showed some flashes as a young player as well. They've got enough playmakers on the perimeter and on the outside to make this thing operate. At left tackle, you have Andrew Thomas, one of the best in football. At right tackle, Jermaine Illuminor actually made that position a little bit more respectable last season. The only time he really struggled was when he had to move around and help replace Andrew Thomas, and that just completely obliterated the matchups. They weren't able to help him on that side anymore, and he just became a little exposed. The interior O-line does need a little bit of work, but I thought last year it was at least a little bit better than previous seasons. So offensively, you have weaponry. You've got an offensive-minded guy in Brian Daboll who's proven to get the most out of Daniel Jones, proven to develop Josh Allen. So there's enough there from that side of things. Defensively, you've got a pretty good front seven with a pretty good pass rush led by Dexter Lawrence, Brian Burns, who they spent a lot of money on and a lot of investment in. You've got Thibodeau. You've got, decent linebackers, I guess. I mean, you've got Okereke, who's at least one good linebacker in there. And it looks like all those guys are signed. All those guys are at least there for the short term. The secondary is a problem. They're trash, in my opinion, outside of maybe Andrew Phillips and Nubin, the rookies from last year. There's a little bit of promise there, but they definitely have a lot of holes. The thing is, though, they're in a division with the Eagles, the Super Bowl champs, the Commanders, who made the NFC Championship, the Cowboys, who are America's team. The Giants are the forgotten franchise, and there's going to be a pressure from the ownership. There's going to be a pressure after the embarrassment of last season, both on and off the field, where the Giants are going to want to make something happen. So we're not really talking about what they would have to give for Stafford in this case. You would not want to give up your third overall pick, okay? But if they could somehow get Stafford to New York, that would change the perspective of this franchise. That would immediately make them more interesting. That would immediately make them like kind of a feisty potential playoff team. I'm not sure how competitive they would be. Like if they would be a contender, I think that would be going a little too far. They would need some improvements on defense, in my opinion, but that would at least make them a little captivating for 2025 and beyond. This just maybe is not the most complete team. This would be more of desperation, in my opinion, out of all the teams on the list. So that's the New York Giants, guys. Just checking the chat real quick on YouTube here. Rams GM is being short-sighted, and it's going to blow up on the Rams when Stafford leaves. Get ready for them being fourth place. The Vikings are the only Super Bowl contender I can see Stafford on. We'll talk about the Vikings at the end, guys. They're not officially on this list, but I do want to talk about them. He's not agreeing to a trade with the Giants or the Raiders, etc. I'm not so sure. It kind of depends on how much money they're willing to pay him and a lot of other factors. Larry says Stafford isn't going anywhere, especially not an awful team like the Giants. Again, guys, I think you could see a lane where the Giants, you could buy into the Giants, especially if they really, really want him. I mean, that could change a player's opinion, I feel like. Why do these people think Stafford wants to waste the last few years on a bad team? Stafford feeling nostalgic about his Detroit days. Maybe. I just feel like, okay, so we've got to talk about the rumors where they're at. And the rumors are that the Giants are like the number one team that's coming to mind for this trade. The Giants are heavily interested in Stafford. And there are breadcrumbs of him being traded. So we've got to discuss it at the end of the day. Why would the Rams even get rid of Stafford? That's a great question. I think the only thing I could really say to that is I feel like they maybe want to, where their roster is at right now, Cooper Kupp is leaving the team. Where they're at, they're very young. And maybe what they're thinking is if we get rid of Stafford now, we can almost I don't know how to say this, but basically we could restart our franchise in a way. We've got some pieces on place on defense, but now we could get rid of the heavy contract, the veteran quarterback before it's too late. And we could get a young quarterback in there that's cheap, and we could use all these resources to build our team up into a real contender. Now, that would have to take finding a young quarterback, but I guess that's the way you could look at it, is like maybe we could get this young quarterback around a young team and a young core. And that's kind of my thought behind it. Let's get to the second team on the list, which is the Las Vegas Raiders. Now, the Raiders are on the list because they obviously need a quarterback. Now, as somebody in the chat already pointed out, this is one of the more flawed teams on the list. The Giants were, I think, actually a little bit more complete. They have at least the pass rush, the front seven, the coach in place for me to believe in, the weaponry, right? The Raiders, what you're talking about with them is, okay, they brought in Pete Carroll. So this is a reason why you might make this move. Pete Carroll is old. He's going to be the oldest coach in the NFL. So he doesn't have that many years left. You would think, as much as Pete Carroll was hired to turn around the culture of the Raiders and to rebuild them and get them pointing in the right direction, what's the best way to do that? It's by winning. And who helps you win? Matthew Stafford. So you put together a Super Bowl winning coach, multi-time Super Bowl appearance coach, in my opinion, Hall of Fame caliber coach in Pete Carroll, and you put him with Matthew Stafford. And for the next couple of years, you go through this experience and you try to build a winning culture with these two. Tom Brady is obviously involved with the Raiders in decision making. I'm pretty sure he's a believer in aging quarterbacks more than most. And I don't feel like Mark Davis is against making an aggressive move at this position because it's been a while since he's had a real quarterback. And it feels like he's kind of been embarrassed by the decision to get rid of Derek Carr a couple years ago, despite not being like an incredible quarterback. At least he had stability with the Raiders and they went to the playoffs not that long ago. So it kind of feels like they would be willing to make an aggressive move for a quarterback. They're not really in a position at the top of the draft to get a quarterback. So a veteran quarterback would make sense. Chip Kelly is also very intriguing when you're talking about an offensive coordinator fit with really any quarterback, but I'm really intrigued to see what he can bring to the NFL in his second go around after what he did at Ohio State. Brock Bowers is going to be one of the most premier weapons in football, like right as soon as this year. Last year, he was already the best tight end, receiving tight end, arguably in football, one of the best tight ends in football. So in year two, he's already going to be on a short list of premier weapons that you can center your offense around. Jacoby Myers is a good secondary piece at wide receiver. You could potentially go out and add another receiver as well. Maybe even bring a Cooper Kupp. The other thing is with the Raiders, they have the second most cap space. So they could afford to rebuild their entire team around Matthew Stafford with the money that they have. They could also afford to actually get Matthew Stafford and pay him what he wants. On the defensive side, it would also appeal to Max Crosby, a player that has been kind of hinting at wanting to get traded. And by bringing in a veteran quarterback that's a proven winner like Matthew Stafford, it would allow Max Crosby to stay with the Raiders, to lead their defense, and to still be that face of that side of the ball. On top of that, this Raiders defensive line does have some gems on it. Like Christian Wilkins didn't really get to play last year with the Raiders, but him and Max Crosby together was always thought of as a great concept for an awesome, dominant defensive line. Tyree Wilson sort of broke out near the end of last season. Malcolm Kuntz is a free agent. He was really good 2 years ago. Maybe they could retain him. And all of a sudden, if you have Stafford on offense behind an offensive line that has everybody returning, an offensive line that's fairly young, you've got a good left tackle in Miller, you've got a young guard in Jackson Powers Johnson, Parham's also young and promising. Andre James is a solid center, right? They might have to fix right tackle, but if they could bring in like a right tackle or a wide receiver, they've got $90+ million. You put Stafford behind center. All of a sudden, with Chip Kelly, you're thinking about a pretty interesting offense there, and Brock Bowers at the centerpiece of the offense. Then defensively, you've got a good defensive line. Yes, you got to fix the secondary. So yeah, there's a lot of things that got to happen here in order for the Raiders to jump to contender, especially considering they're in the AFC West with the Chiefs, the Broncos, the Chargers. But there's at least, it's the Raiders. It's an older coach. It's the want to be competitive. It's the want to be aggressive that I feel like the Raiders do give off. And I think they're trying to turn this franchise around. So by getting Stafford, it would at least help them do that as soon as possible and make them relevant and make them competitive in the arms race of the AFC West. So It's not the best destination for Stafford because a lot has to be fixed around him in order for them to be a contender. But it would be a good idea for the Raiders for the future of their franchise and getting them pointing in the right direction. All right, let's get to the third team on the list. That is the Pittsburgh Steelers. Pittsburgh Steelers are up next, and I actually really like this one compared to the ones I've already discussed because there's at least like a logical path for the Steelers to be a really good team if they got Matthew Stafford, right? Like Stafford is, in my opinion, still like a top 6 quarterback in the NFL, top 7 at the least. Like I feel like he is right up there. He is still awesome. Okay. The Steelers have been the best team in football without a quarterback over the last couple of years. Like if you were to look at the landscape of the NFL and you were to say, who's the best team with the worst quarterback? That's probably the Pittsburgh Steelers, if we're being honest, right? And Mike Tomlin has been able to just create magic and have this incredible voodoo, and people don't understand how they're winning games. Mike Tomlin could use a little relief in terms of having a quarterback beside him who he knows can run an offense, can make the big throws when he needs it, and can complement a good defense. And he hasn't had that player since Ben Roethlisberger. Since Ben Roethlisberger, the Steelers have been chasing a quarterback. And why I think this makes sense is Stafford is in the same stage as the Steelers. Mike Tomlin is kind of getting on the hot seat. He hasn't won a playoff game since 2016. Steelers fans are growing restless with this franchise. They're continuously winning and staying competitive, but they're not actually a contender year in and year out. And the difference between them and teams like the Ravens, the Bills, and the Chiefs is quarterback. Okay, it's not anything else, right? Arthur Smith kind of solved the offensive coordinator position last year. Really big upgrade for them last season. He at least made their offense a little bit more diverse, a little bit more respectable. They're at least a little bit better, right? More professional, not a laughing stock, despite their bad quarterback play from Russell Wilson and Justin Fields. They have a young offensive line that is pretty much all returning. James Daniels is a free agent. If they could bring him back, that would be nice. But besides that, you've got young guys that are developing and perhaps hitting the next level next year. They've got George Pickens as a number 1 wide receiver. Perhaps a veteran quarterback like Stafford could get his head on straight. You could bring in maybe another receiver from the slot position, somebody like a Chris Godwin or somebody like Cooper Kupp that could complement Pickens well. You've also got Pat Freiermuth at tight end. You've got enough pieces there. Warren in the backfield. Najee Harris is a free agent. I don't think that would be a big loss, but they could bring him back if they want. You could pretty much add another receiver and Stafford and have like a respectable offense, a good offense. I would say it'd be above average with a good play caller. And you have a defense that's pretty much been top 5, top 10 for the past like 5 to 7 years. And it's an older defense. It's like an aging defense, right? You've got Cam Hayward. How many years does he have left? TJ Watt. How many peak years does he have left? Alex Highsmith is in his prime. Pat Queen is in his prime. Minka Fitzpatrick's in his prime, right? Joey Porter Jr. is just entering his prime. How many more years do we have with this defense intact and together? Right? So you've got to consider that. The window for the Steelers to make an aggressive move at quarterback is right now. It's today. It's not tomorrow. It wasn't yesterday. It's today. So for the Steelers, this makes the most sense because they don't have that many holes to fill around Stafford to actually compel him that they're going to be a contender, right? It's not that crazy to think about, okay? And they're also in an AFC North where the biggest disadvantage they have is quarterback. Compared to the Bengals and compared to the Ravens, they're completely out-quarterbacked. But with Stafford, they have the only guy in that division that's won a Super Bowl, and he beat Joe Burrow in that game. So I feel like the Steelers, with where they're at with Tomlin, the seat is hot. With where they're at with their defense, with where they're at with their fan base, they're restless. They need this move to happen. So I actually really like this one for the Steelers. Before we get to the next team, let me check the chat real quick. What we got? He's a Giant, says Magic. Big Al says the Raiders might give up a ton to get Stafford. Is possible. What are the chances Vegas could get both Stafford and Kupp? I'm not so sure Kupp's going to get traded. Like, I don't know if he's going to get traded or released. Like, I think if Stafford actually does get traded, I think it's more likely that Kupp actually probably gets released. It would be interesting if a team would trade for both of them in the same deal, though. That would be pretty interesting. Obviously, they have a great connection and are great friends. So I'm sure that wherever Stafford would go, Kupp would want to go to that same spot. And I'm pretty sure about that. It's not going to be too late if we win a Super Bowl, says DeRay. Which team you talking about? Bro, the rumors don't matter. We don't need anything in the draft. I'm not sure who you're talking about. If you want to clarify, I can get back to you on that. And Jeffrey likes Minnesota as a location. We'll talk about them at the end, guys. And the next team on the list is a team that's already tried the veteran quarterback approach, but I believe that they could try it again. That is the New York Jets. Jets. Now, reason number one why the Jets would make this move. They really don't have any logical brain when it comes to their decision making, okay? Especially from the ownership position. They just want to go out there and assemble a Madden team, as we know. So the New York Jets, they'll just make it happen, bro. But at the same time, I feel like the Jets, they've got an infrastructure of a team that it would make some sense for Stafford to come in there and be their next quarterback. Clearly, they don't have a quarterback right now. Aaron Rodgers is not that quarterback, and they've already spent so many resources in building around a veteran pocket quarterback, have they not? They've already done that to a great degree. Now they have an entirely new staff. Aaron Glenn being from Detroit, although not a huge connection with Stafford, but was a Detroit defensive coordinator. Stafford was in Detroit. They don't have any crossover, but just saying, legendary quarterback from Detroit, defensive coordinator from Detroit. That would be pretty cool. But a guy that does have a connection is the Jets' new offensive coordinator who was with Detroit in 2020 with Matthew Stafford as an offensive assistant. So there's at least some sort of tie there between Stafford and the Jets' offensive staff, because I believe that Stafford would most likely want to go to a team with an offensive head coach. But if there were some sort of connection in the offensive staff, it would make it more comfortable for a transition. So at least there's that. Now, secondly, right, they've got Garrett Wilson, an awesome wide receiver. They have potentially, if Stafford gets traded there, they probably would keep Davante Adams, you would think, right? Like Davante Adams would probably want to stay on a team with Matthew Stafford. I'm just guessing, right? I'm just guessing there. Their interior O-line was actually very underrated. Every single one of their three interior offensive linemen finished in the top 11 in PFF's grading. That is Simpson, Tippmann, and Elijah Vera Tucker. All were in the top 11 and are returning next season. That is very important when protecting a pocket quarterback such as Stafford. Now, their tackle positions are big-time issues right now because Tyron Smith's a free agent, and of course, Morgan Moses is a free agent. But that being said, they did draft Fatanu in the first round. Is it Fashanu? Yeah. He was picked in the first round. That being said, he got hurt last year, so I don't know when he's returning, but he looked okay as a rookie replacing Tyron Smith, but I wasn't sold in his first season. That being said, I don't know when he'll be back. I don't have the timeline on that. So, but the tackle position would need an upgrade. That's kind of what I'm saying. Tackle position is a problem, but they do have the receivers. They do have the running backs in Breece Hall, in Allen, right? In the interior O-line, they've got the protection. They've got a tie to the offensive coordinator between the quarterback. And defensively, yes, they have a lot of free agents, but they also have a core of a defense there. And their defensive head coach would obviously help kind of fill out the rest. And hopefully what you're thinking is Aaron Glenn would elevate the rest of the defense. You have Quinnen Williams. You have Quincy Williams. Awesome interior D lineman. Awesome linebacker. You have Sauce Gardner, who I really like to fit in Aaron Glenn's man coverage, press coverage, blitz system. I'd be intrigued by that. Will McDonald and Jermaine Johnson on the edges are two awesome younger players that I like. And CJ Mosley is still there. Now, they do have some free agents at safety. They don't really have a safety on their roster right now. Corner and DJ Reed is a free agent, and some of their D tackles and things are free agents. But I feel like with those players on defense, you still got a core of a good defense, and you still have a lot of cap space. And again, the offense is kind of built for Aaron Rodgers. So replacing Stafford or Rodgers with Stafford, Stafford is a lot better than A-Rod was, this past season. So it'd be a huge upgrade. You could talk yourself into it for sure. And it's the opposite New York team. Maybe Stafford wants to go to New York. I don't know, man. Maybe there's something there for him. There's something pulling him to New York. I don't know. But it's interesting. It's definitely interesting because I feel like the Jets have somewhat, just like the Giants, become a laughing stock. They've become a team that everybody is just laughing at, especially after this past year where Aaron Rodgers, that whole experience just like went down the tubes. It was awful. Like it never worked out. It never was going to work out. And everybody's just laughing at him. But if they immediately got Matthew Stafford with this new regime, they could make a statement like right away that we are here and we're legit and we're aggressive and we're going to compete. Even if we have Buffalo in our division, even if Mike Vrabel and Drake May are on the rise, even if Tua and McDaniel are there, we're still going to be this really awesome team with Stafford leading the way for the next couple of years. So I'm intrigued by that at the very least. All right. Then we've got next up at number 5. This team is also low-key a really interesting option. The Indianapolis Colts, I think, should be a team that wouldn't surprise. I mean, you think about what this team has in terms of infrastructure, how much better would the Colts be with a quarterback, right? That's the biggest problem on this team. If I were to ask 99% of NFL fans, what's the problem with the Colts? I think 99% would say it's quarterback. Anthony Richardson has been awful. He can't complete 50% of his passes. Now, the Colts have to make that decision on Anthony Richardson. I don't know where they're at with Anthony Richardson. Do they think he is the future? Do they think he is the guy? Do they think he is still the one they want to build their franchise around? If the answer is no, or the answer is maybe, but we're not sure, then why not go after Stafford? And at the very least, you could have Anthony Richardson grow and learn behind a veteran quarterback for the next couple of seasons. And then try again with Richardson in a couple years, in a year or two, right? You look at the Colts, and they're in a winnable division. Out of all the AFC teams, the AFC division winners, right? You have the Bills. You have the Ravens. You have the Chiefs. And you have the Texans. Out of all the division winners, the most winnable is probably that division. Is it not? Right? So that's first. Second of all, Shane Steichen has not really been given a proper opportunity to make noise with his offense because he's rather had Gardner Minshew running his offense, Joe Flacco running his offense, or Anthony Richardson. We don't know how good of a coach Shane Steichen is because he's never really been given a chance with an above average talent at quarterback. So it would be nice to know if we had the quarterback or the coach, and we don't really know if we have either, if we're the Colts here, okay? Then you have Chris Ballard. Chris Ballard kind of needs to make something happen. He needs to make a move to save his career in Indianapolis. There's only so many seasons you can go without addressing quarterback after Andrew Luck and still hold and maintain your job. I understand that he's great at drafting linebackers and offensive linemen, but at a certain point, you need to hit on the big-time positions like quarterback. And he hasn't been able to do that. So a way that they could save themselves from Anthony Richardson and that potential mistake or whatever is by bringing in Matthew Stafford behind an offensive line that's well-built already. Now, Kelly at center is a free agent. I believe one of their guards is also a free agent, not Quentin Nelson, but I believe their right guard. But they've got the tackles in place. They could easily bring back Kelly at center. You've got Quentin Nelson at left guard. You've already got like a top 10 O-line in football. You've got an offensive-minded coach who's worked with many different quarterbacks, Jalen Hurts, Justin Herbert, Gardner Minshew, Joe Flacco, different systems, different quarterbacks. He could make it work there. Jonathan Taylor and a dynamic running game to begin with. That's balance for Stafford. You've got a plethora of wide receivers. I think their wide receiver room is the most underrated in football, but they can't take advantage of that really because of their quarterback position. They can't, right? You've got Josh Downs in the slot. You've got Alec Pierce as a downfield target. You've got Michael Pittman as like a number one. And then you have Mitchell, who looked real promising as a rookie, has a lot of skill. Okay. So you've got a really deep wide receiver room. They're all signed. They're all coming back. You've got Jonathan Taylor. You've got a good core of an offensive line and a defense that has a pretty good D-line, right? DeForest Buckner, Grover Stewart, Alatu entering year 2, Kwity Paye, who's there and signed. Epicam comes back after getting injured before last season. So they've got a good rotation of a D-line. They do have some players that are free agents like Blackman and Bryan, but I do believe they could bring 1 or 2 of those guys back. They did switch their defensive coordinator, which I thought was a huge move for them to get better entering next year. That was a good thing that they did. I wasn't a huge fan of Gus Bradley at this point, but I really look at them and I'm like, if they had a quarterback, I feel like they would be fielding a top 10 offense in football because overall, from the design, I think it's solid. From the balance, I think it's good. From the receiving core, I think it's good. They're missing a quarterback. Defensively, I think they have the foundation of a D-line, some savvy players and some underrated players in the back end of the defense. Like, they could immediately be competing for this division with Matthew Stafford. So I actually think the Colts are not too far off from being a competitive team, but Ballard needs to make that aggressive decision. And he might need to make that decision to keep his job and his career. So I do like this fit. I do like this fit, and I do think it makes sense for the Colts. It does make sense. All right. Let's get to the next team on the list. This one I think is arguably the least likely. Maybe not, but it's not my favorite, okay? And that's a team within the AFC South, but I want to bring them up anyways because they're relevant for the quarterback position. That's the Tennessee Titans. The Tennessee Titans have the first pick in the draft. My question is, are the Titans as an organization, as a franchise, ready to make that move for a Matthew Stafford? Or should they go the approach of a young quarterback? They have the first pick. They have their choice of quarterbacks if they want it at the top. Now, there have been recent rumors that they don't really want that quarterback, so that would open them up for potentially a trade for Stafford. Okay. And they do have one very crucial connection with Stafford. That's Brian Callahan. You know, a lot of people know Brian Callahan from Cincinnati, but he was actually Detroit's quarterback coach in 2016 and 2017 with Matthew Stafford. So I'm sure that Callahan's a fan of Stafford, and I'm pretty confident that Stafford and Callahan have a decent connection there. So that is interesting to me, right? That is the one thing that could potentially drive Stafford to go to Tennessee. I could see it. Okay. It's a flawed team. It's a flawed organization. There's not a lot of confidence in their front office, in my opinion. But the one thing the Titans did do last offseason is prove that they can be aggressive, right? They went out, they traded for L'Jarius Sneed. They went out and they signed Calvin Ridley. They signed Tony Pollard. They were aggressive in their pursuit. Could they do that at quarterback with Matthew Stafford? Very possible, okay? Ever since Mike Vrabel left, they've just become a totally different franchise where they're willing to throw out cash to anybody that wants it. So it's very possible. Their defense was actually very underrated last season. They were second in the NFL in yards allowed and kept them in a lot of games, especially early in the season. But they just got injured, kind of torn apart, and just really rattled by how poor their offense was, it felt like, in a lot of games. And they ended up giving up points in the end. But, you know, you've got Calvin Ridley there. You've got Tony Pollard in the backfield. It's not an awful situation. The left side of the offensive line, you've got J.C. Latham, who is a first-round pick. You've got Skoronski, who is a first-round pick. You have Cushenberry, who's one of the higher-paid centers in football. So the left side of the O-line is well taken care of, at least it projects to be. And they've got a really good O-line coach. The right side of the line is a problem, but they could help fix that with their draft and with their money that they do possess. And again, they lost 6 games by 1 score. So they were competitive last year, but Will Levis and Mason Rudolph was not the answer at quarterback. Callahan was constantly frustrated with his connection between his quarterbacks, couldn't really figure out how to operate this offense. And he had a pretty poor debut as a head coach in the NFL. But you bring him somebody that he already has a connection with, already has ties to, already understands his offense, and you could see how that might work with the defense that was already well off last season, right? So Tennessee might make this move, but it might be a little too early for them to make this move is kind of my problem with it. Before we get to our final team on the list and then the Vikings, let's get to the chat. Okay. Jay wants Stafford to go to the Giants. DP says he could also go to the Patriots or Browns. Now tell me why he can't. He's not going to the Patriots. I'm a Patriots fan. He's not going to the Patriots. Drake May is the Patriots quarterback. Raider says it's a shame AP never had an actual QB to prove himself with. I'm not an AP fan myself. But hey, some people can disagree with that take. I feel like he was over his head. I mean, I just don't think he was fit to be a head coach in the NFL. D'Angelo says, I don't know about the Rams and Stafford, but Carr needs to step up for my Saints. Or we need to get better. We need to get better offense and defense. Yeah, the Saints are kind of stuck. I think they're stuck with Carr. I don't think they're going to be making a move at quarterback. I think Carr will probably have one more season there. No way Stafford goes to Nashville, says Big Al. Trade Noodle Arm to the Rams and bring Stafford to Miami, says Brian Flores in the chat. That's hilarious. Yeah, that would be a great fit. I'd love that, but I don't think that's happening, bro. McDaniel is obsessed with Tua, so I don't think that's happening there, Brian Flores. Okay, final team on the list is the Cleveland Brownies. I have to bring them up because they do need a quarterback. Deshaun Watson is injured. He could be out for at least half the season, if not more. And the Cleveland Browns, again, there's talk they could draft the quarterback. So why wouldn't they at least explore an opportunity to trade for Matthew Stafford and potentially redeem themselves for trading for Deshaun Watson? Just saying. This is probably not likely to happen, but I at least wanted to explore it and why it could happen, okay? Maybe the rookie quarterback would be a better idea because you wouldn't be spending money and so big of a portion of your cap with two veteran quarterbacks. So you could have a rookie and you could have a veteran in Deshaun Watson and a rookie, whoever they would select there. But one reason it could happen, okay? Could they get out of Deshaun Watson's contract due to the injury, or could they explore some options to do that somehow, some way? Perhaps there is an avenue there. But would it allow them to keep Myles Garrett? If they were to make an aggressive move for Matthew Stafford, would that maybe entice Myles Garrett to stay? Because Myles Garrett's their best player. Myles Garrett's been their best player. Myles Garrett's been the foundation of their defense. If they lose him, their defense completely loses its shape and they completely lose their potential as a contending team, to be honest. So if they did trade for Stafford, not only would it completely change the team, completely change the outlook of Cleveland in the next couple of seasons, and give them a quarterback that they wanted to have with Deshaun Watson, right? But it could also keep their best player in the face of their franchise, Myles Garrett, on their team, okay? You look at Stefanski and Schwartz, and Schwartz does have ties to Stafford, right? He was the head coach of the Lions at one point. Stefanski is a good offensive coach, well-respected, multi-time coach of the year, if I'm not mistaken. They have a veteran roster, very low-key. Their O-line is kind of old. Like, you look at it, Pocic is aging, Teller is aging, Batonio is certainly aging, Conklin is aging, but they're still good. But what made the O-line of the Browns, or the team, or the offense of the Browns so captivating over the last few years is the O-line. Like, their O-line was one of the best in football. And you could have a veteran quarterback behind that's well protected. Stefanski runs a good run scheme overall. And he's proven that he can work with a lot of different quarterbacks, whether it be with Kirk Cousins, whether it be with Baker Mayfield, whether it be with Jameis Winston, Joe Flacco off the couch. The only guy that it hasn't worked with really is Deshaun Watson. And I think that's a Deshaun Watson problem. Jerry Jeudy broke out last season. Interesting wide receiver option. I like Cedric Tillman. I love David Njoku. Could they add another receiver there? There's potential there as well, especially if they can keep that first, that second pick in the draft. Maybe Travis Hunter or something like that. That could be pretty interesting, especially if they keep Myles Garrett, right? And then their defense has been one of the best in the NFL for the past few seasons, led by Schwartz. They have a great cornerback trio. They're really not losing anybody on defense at all. If you look at their depth chart, they have very few free agents. So there's at least enough reason there where they've got a veteran roster on offense, a roster that was made to be competitive right now. And honestly, if they don't take advantage of it right now, they might as well just tear the house down and start fresh and just rebuild completely. And that's where they'll go with trading Myles Garrett and all that stuff. But if they want to take advantage of this roster and the here and now, they could trade for Stafford. So it's not very likely, but I did want to explore it nonetheless. Now, the final team I want to talk about who's not on the list, guys, is the Minnesota Vikings. They definitely deserve mention as the 8th potential landing spot. Now, the reason they're not officially on the list is because I didn't think it was likely with JJ McCarthy. Because I feel like the Vikings are intent on the JJ McCarthy experience and the JJ McCarthy era beginning in 2025. That being said, it could be a potential missed opportunity for the Vikings as a franchise if they did not trade for Stafford. Just imagine what Stafford could do on this team. Just imagine how good the Vikings would be with Matthew Stafford. This could be the best Vikings team we've seen since like 2009 with late career Brett Favre. And in some ways, there's a little bit of a Matthew Stafford connection there, right? Like an aging quarterback, gunslinger, late career renaissance type vibe. You could have that with Matthew Stafford, but you think about the connection with Kevin O'Connell. Kevin O'Connell was the Rams offensive coordinator not that long ago, right? Won a Super Bowl with Matthew Stafford as the offensive coordinator of the Rams. You have Justin Jefferson. You have Jordan Addison. You have former Stafford teammate TJ Hawkinson. You have two of the best tackles in the NFL, or one of the best tackle duos in the NFL, Christian Darrisaw and O'Neal on the right. You've got weapons. You've got a scheme that he already knows and loves. That's very similar to the Rams, if not the most similar in the entire NFL. Yes, they would need a running back. Okay, whatever. Maybe they bring back Aaron Jones or whatever. That would make sense with if they had Stafford, because it would be, one last ride for potentially both of them. But yeah, the interior O-line could use a little help, but there's not a lot of things to fix on the Vikings. Their defense was already top 3 or 4 in the NFL last year. They have a brilliant defensive coordinator in Brian Flores. Yes, their secondary is a little bit old, and a couple of them are free agents. Gilmore, Bynum, and Murphy are all set to be free agents. But again, they have enough cap space to make this happen. They have a young quarterback who's coming off of an injury. And it's almost like the Niners the last few years, where it's like, do we really want to, when the Niners had like the Jimmy Garoppolo and Trey Lance dilemma, where it was like, yeah, we drafted Trey Lance, but he's not ready to be the quarterback of a contending team. He's not ready, right? So they continued to they brought back Jimmy Garoppolo. And it was like, we need to still try to compete. And they end up making an NFC championship. And then eventually he actually gets hurt and Jimmy Garoppolo goes down and Brock Purdy becomes a thing. But that's kind of the way I see it, is like the Vikings have this rare opportunity. They have a defense. They have the weapons. They have the coaching staff. How much longer is all this going to be in place? Now, maybe that's an ideal situation for a young quarterback to thrive in and to take advantage of a rookie contract deal. But what if JJ is not the guy? Or like, what if he's just okay in year 1 and 2 and he eventually gets going, but the team gets worse? You would have an opportunity right now to be in the NFC Championship, to be in the Super Bowl. You could be that good, in my opinion. I mean, they won 14 games last year with Sam Darnold, who was good. He was okay. He's okay. He's not Matthew Stafford, right? So, I mean, I'm just saying you could take a leap from a good team to a great team with Matthew Stafford. So that's where I'm like, it might be worth it. Even if JJ has to sit a year or sit 2 years, right? It might be worth it just because of that. Take advantage. You want to win a Super Bowl. That's every team and every franchise's goal, is to win a Super Bowl. So Stafford would allow you to be in the conversation for that. Okay. So, and also you look at that division to finish it off, take advantage of Ben Johnson in the infancy stages of the Chicago Bears. You take advantage of Detroit without their offensive and defensive coordinators trying to replace them. You take advantage of Green Bay being a conservative team by nature. You go out, you make a move. You win the division. You win the NFC. You go to the Super Bowl. It's possible. It's possible. All right, let's check the chat one final time. The Niners maybe, says Redbeard. I would say no, just because they're the biggest rival of the Rams. I just don't see why that would happen. Dan says, yeah, they are not going to trade him within the division. Yeah, they're not going to trade him within the division. Seahawks, I also thought about, but Seahawks wouldn't make sense either. They're just too big of rivals. It wouldn't make sense. Dr. Disconnect says, imagine him going to something silly like the Panthers to give Young some time behind a great veteran. Don't see that. I think Young proved enough last year that he'll be the starter for the Panthers, and they'll want to build around him next season. Caleb says, Vikings don't need a QB. You sure about that? Darnold's a free agent. Their quarterback right now is a guy that has never played an NFL snap, and it's a team that won 14 games last year. I'm just saying, consider it. Consider it. Stafford is on the decline. Darnold is in his prime. No. Stafford's still a lot better than Darnold. Caleb says Darnold was a top 5 QB. I think you're delusional, bro. Darnold's also going to leave. I don't see Darnold coming back, man. I'm just going to be honest. Maybe I'm wrong about that. But if they are going to go with Darnold, okay, that's also the final thing to leave off of here. Okay? If you would rather, okay, if you're going to spend money on Darnold, I'd rather spend that money on Stafford. That's just me. All right. I mean, did you not watch Stafford against the Philadelphia Eagles and then you watch Patrick Mahomes against Philadelphia Eagles? Just saying. All right, guys. That's it, though. This has been NFL Daily. Appreciate everybody watching. Make sure to tune in tomorrow. That is 7 p.m. Eastern every day of the week. Hope you guys enjoyed. Peace.